Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It's a great challenge, and the panelists have even a greater challenge because of the timetable. I will not introduce you because you've heard already who the members are, and I'll start with you, Tamir Pardo, former head of Mossad. I think some people here envy you after what has happened just recently. We heard the words, money is not everything, says Mr. Pardo. We heard the Prime Minister Bennett speaking quite strongly about Israel falling asleep at the guard in 2015, and even now if we have a deal, there might be some disagreement with the United States, and Israel is going to maintain its freedom. What do you think about it? Please say it to the mic. The question is whether Israel has a strategy vis-à-vis Iran. That's the question. I think at the moment, at least, and the Prime Minister also said that we're thinking, we're talking, and as far as I see, there's no really consolidated strategy, but a few things that have been said recently seem to hint that we're trying to go back to something similar to what was before. So in the interview that Amos Gilad was moderating between the Soviet Union and Russia, there was a long struggle. There's an interesting story between the Soviet Union and the United States, he says. There was like a war game that was held at a certain time, and there it was said that the two countries are conveying 100 nuclear missiles, one towards the other, and the American wanted to see what the result is going to be. At the time, the Soviet Union won over the Americans, although the Americans had much better missiles at the time, because the result of such a war that stopped a second before the world actually collapsed was that the Soviet Union came back from a world where people used to eat meat once a week, and there were a few big cities in a very bad situation, and they went from 1860 to 1840, whereas the United States went back from 1980 to 1860. So at the end, the one who really had a lot to lose actually lost the battle, although the weapons were more sophisticated. The PM Bennett said that we are a country with a wonderful industry, wonderful economy, with a health system, education system, with all the criticism, it's very good. The security strategy, in all these things, we are better. The question is whether we can keep threatening every day on waging war. You have to remember one thing, that the IDF or the security system do very well the campaign here and there. They know how to attack the nuclear plant in Syria. They also know how to release the people from Entebbe. Regarding a one-time shot, there's no force in the world that's better than the IDF. Iran is not the same thing. Iran, it's not the same opera. Iran, it's a third circle. This is going to be a war in a third circle. Only one country can do that, and that is the USA. And there as well, they are required also to do things differently. If we cannot finish this in a one-time shot, we have to think twice. You don't think it's possible? I am not exactly familiar with the intelligence of today, but when we talk about multiple targets, as opposed to what Amos did, you have to remember that the Iraqi story and the Syrian narrative were imported capability, because in Syria the plant was Korean, in Iran it was French. Now we're talking about scores of targets in Iran. And unless you can hold Iran in a situation like United States tried to do Ladakh after the first Gulf War, then we can find ourselves in a situation which will be much worse. Thank you, Tamir. And continuation, Gideon, I'd like to ask you the question that will lead us ahead. To what extent is Iran even close to an atomic bomb?
In general, we can say that in order to obtain nuclear weapons, there are three components that are necessary. You need fissile material, and you need a launcher. Iran is basically doing whatever it wants about a launcher. It doesn't have everything that it needs, but it is definitely making progress in that direction. Regarding the development of the weapon itself, it seems that that stopped a few years ago, but there are many things that they are doing secretly, and you have to realize that the intelligence on this is very minimal. So there are many question marks on this issue. So we know what was going on in 2003, maybe up to 2009 and 10, but not beyond that. So there are a lot of questions in that regard. But when we're talking about the amount of fissile material, we know that you need 25 kilos for one bomb. Enriched to 90%, uranium enriched to 90%. We knew that they had. We know that, and we know that how far they were from that, and that is really the only thing that can be measured to determine what they have. And the easiest way to do so is what the Americans call the breakout time. In order to answer your question, I would say that the breakout time gives the minimal necessary amount of time that they will need to obtain a bomb. Developing everything else, that we have a lot less knowledge about where they stand. The breakout time now is three weeks, which is the general, that's the common assumption. In 2013, before the agreement, it was about 1 month. The breakout time was about 1 month. Because of the agreement, it was increased to 9-10 months. And once we withdrew from the agreement, when Trump withdrew from the agreement, the breakout time was dropped to the current situation. So this index, this measure, is very important for understanding where Iran stands. And just a word about the value of this agreement. This agreement has many disadvantages and a few advantages. We have to keep in mind that, first of all, the agreement, if it is upheld, will not enable them until the beginning of 2026 to make more progress than the 10 to 12 month breakout time. Once that is violated, there will be an instant alert, and then it'll take about 10 months until they're able to obtain nuclear weapons. Because of the current situation and everything that happened, their technological knowledge is much better, and even if they're able to restore themselves, to restore the initial situation, they will shorten the breakout time by developing more advanced centrifuges. It'll be reduced to 6 to 7 months. Another thing that we have to remember regarding the agreement is that until 31, say about 9-10 years from now, they will not be allowed to have more than 300 kilo of highly enriched uranium. So as long as they uphold the agreement, they will not have the ability, and if they violate the agreement, then sanctions can be imposed very quickly without any option for veto, not only U.S. sanctions, but sanctions imposed by many other countries around the world as well. So there is an opportunity, if the agreement is similar to the previous one, and that's a question, If it is similar to the previous agreement, then we have a time frame in which it's quite clear what will happen. We have about 9-10 years in which they will not have the ability to make progress towards obtaining nuclear weapons. And after that period of time, the breakout time will be about a month like today. But if they violate the agreement along the way, then there will be an instant alert and instant sanctions. And that's the advantage of this agreement. It buys time. Is it important to buy time? We heard all different things about what's happening in Iran. The water crisis in Iran is so severe that I'm not sure if it'll take 1 decade or 2, but they're facing a major catastrophe there, and that has implications for our ability to prepare as well. That's the advantage of buying time. I would like to ask the two of you the same question. Next week, the nuclear talks between the superpowers and Iran will be resumed. What do you think are the chances of the talks succeeding? Will an agreement be renewed? And assuming there is no agreement, what are the alternatives that Israel has?
Know if the Americans know if there will be a deal or not. It's a good agreement for the Iranians. I, as an Iranian, I will do everything to go back to this agreement. It's great, it's good. We can develop the nuclear plan, and at the end of the project, in 2030, less than 10 years, to receive legitimacy to do whatever they want. And as an Israeli, because I don't know, I have to ask myself, what are the possibilities? I have 3 possibilities at the moment: to continue the diplomatic effort and to try to convince the United States that without a military threat and pressure on Iran, nothing's going to happen. You have to remember that the Iranians negotiated with the Europeans. We forget it. They called it a critical negotiation because they were criticizing the U.S. Nothing came out of it. But we brought the Americans to pressure the Iranians, and at the end of the day, we even took them out of the SWIFT. They couldn't transfer money from one person to the other, and that was brought Iran to the negotiation table, and Obama was preparing a military option and said it's on the table. These 2 things, as opposed to all the experts, the Iranians will never talk about the nuclear. They came, and the result was that because a bad agreement, in my opinion, and in this bad agreement there are a few good things, but it doesn't make it good. It's a bad agreement with a few good things. So we can continue to manage the diplomatic negotiations. I'm very pessimistic, but my pessimism doesn't have to stop me from negotiating, because if there will be a result, then great. I don't believe there will be a result, but nobody can ensure. The second effort is that, according to everything that is in the world press, we are the Division of Research in the Intelligence. We heard about the nuclear plan in 1994. In 1995, we went to the Americans. We told them about an Iranian plan. It took them 2 years to get convinced. 2 years, the Americans said, we don't know what you're talking about. And it's not as if they had all the facts. All the facts were there in the U.S. We gave it to them. And the Americans refused to recognize the fact that there is a military Iranian project. This is part of our problem, not that the Americans don't know, but the interpretation they give. Somebody once said to me, I will find a smoking gun. I said, you will find a gun. If it's smoking or not, whatever. I'm telling you, the Americans will say that's not smoking, because if it's smoking, they have to take action, and they don't want to do that. So we have to continue what it says in all the media that enabled us to achieve this time gap. We see that at the moment they don't have a bomb because people who worked very hard at the time so that it doesn't happen. And we have to continue these efforts and to ignore all the cautions. The Americans told us that if we continue with that, the Iranians are going to be better. I think that because of that, they stop looking for the drug barons in Mexico, because the more barons they kill, more sophisticated ones come. So what do? You have to stop fighting crime. What kind of a reason is that the Iranians are going to be better because we fight them? So what? We should allow them to continue to develop their nuclear. We gained at least 11 years, and we have to continue aggressively with full power, without hesitating, and to say to American friends, we listen to you as you don't stop fighting against crime. Although the criminals are more sophisticated, we won't stop fighting Iran, although in many cases they might be better. And the third thing, as opposed to what Tamir said, we have to prepare our military force. My estimate, and I hope we don't get there, my estimate we'll have no choice, because the world will do nothing. The American will do nothing. They have other problems more important for them. They're going to invest their efforts there rather than Iran, and the burden of eradicating the Iranian nuclear product is not forever, but at least for a certain time, and we will have to take it upon ourselves. I don't know if we do have the capability or not, but if we don't, then we should have. And at the end, it's in our hands. And to a certain extent, that's what Israel is there for, in order that Jews will not have to go to Washington to ask Washington to defend them. Exactly for that, the state was established. If there's an existential problem to the state of Israel, it can solve it by itself and not other countries. If they want to do it, we don't mind. But otherwise, we have to be in a situation that we can do it. Unfortunately, I didn't hear the PM saying it, but if he says that we're not ready, so we should be ready, whatever it costs and how much time it takes. We have to be ready with capabilities that we can actually hit the nuclears. I know it from the past. It's not impossible. So at this point that it's not impossible, as one who was involved with the many actions that thwarted, can we do it without the U.S., or does the U.S. have to be in the picture?
I talk about Iran on many platforms, but there's one issue that I don't talk about in open forums, and that is Israel's operational policy. We'll keep that in closed rooms where this issue is actually dealt with. I want to talk about strategy. Does the State of Israel have a strategy? What the Prime Minister said was that he was surprised to find that Israel did not have practice, that Israel had rhetorics. He was even more harsh than that. He said that we fell asleep at the guard post. I think that we have to manage a strategy using means that support that strategy, because when it comes to our relationship with the United States has the same strategic goal that we have. They also want Iran not to have nuclear bombs, but their strategy is diplomatic. They believe in diplomacy, and we have very little faith in diplomacy. Even though, if we want to be honest, what postpones Iranian progress towards achieving nuclear weapons was the nuclear agreement, and not military action. That stopped them for about 7 years, and it would have stopped them for longer, because the fact that we fell asleep on guard several years ago was somewhat justified. There was an agreement. The international community had signed an agreement for 15 years. If they had listened to me, I would have said that the agreement isn't terrible for the first 7 to 10 years. As Gideon Frank explained why, but it was a terrible agreement in the past few years, and we should never have reached that point. So it makes sense to sit back for a while for the first few years and plan for the last years. So you're saying that the maximal pressure on Trump was a mistake. The mistake was not in 2015. The mistake was in 2018, when, after the withdrawal from the agreement, during its good years, we had to withdraw in 2028, not in 2018. So if you withdrew from the agreement because, like Amidror said, you think it's a terrible agreement, and you don't agree with me, with my assessment that it was a good agreement for the first few years. The Iranians maintained that agreement, and they didn't violate that. We have to realize that they were stuck where they were. They were 2 months away from a bomb. They became a year away from a bomb. They sent the enriched uranium to Russia. They were left with just a few hundred kilos, and they they were years away from achieving nuclear weapons. And that is much better achievement than we would have been able to make with military actions. But in 2018, after their withdrawal from the agreement without a plan B, because if there's anything you should know about the Iranians, they are smart, they are intelligent, they believe in strategy. They invented chess, they understand the details, they make incredible rugs, and we can't underestimate them. And they're even smarter than we think, because they didn't withdraw from the agreement. They wanted to reach the end point, because at the end, the agreement is excellent for them, as Amidror said. So all they did was violate it and continue to make progress. And now, regarding your question, will the agreement be renewed or not? The Iranians are going back to negotiations, and they're strong. They're strong and facing an enemy that is passionate about renewing the agreement. But the Iranians are strong. They're reading the picture, and they're demanding much more than before. They're demanding the removal of sanctions that are not related to the nuclear program. They're insisting that the next president and the next president of the United States will not withdraw from the agreement. Biden can't give them that guarantee. It depends on Congress. Congress needs 2/3 to approve that. Biden can't make that promise. The Iranians are very rigid, so the chances of renewing the agreement from before are low. And we have to realize that the agreement that we'll reach now is much worse than the previous one, because the fact that we put them a year back, they have already made progress. They have advanced centrifuges, and they have knowledge that can't be taken away. You can't move their knowledge, take their knowledge away and move it to Russia. The Iranians are very strong. I believe that we will not renew the agreement at this point. I don't think they'll be longer and stronger either, which is an agreement, the next agreement that's being discussed. That's another stage. The longer and stronger, which is a better agreement, a longer-term agreement, and a stronger agreement, was not invented here in Israel. It was presented by the Secretary of State of the United States. We had to embrace that idea, but all we said was there is no way that we'll sign an agreement with Iran. So the Americans gradually withdraw back from that excellent idea. So I think that what will end up happening, because since it'll be difficult to go back to 2015 and longer and stronger, it will be impossible, and the United States and the Iranians are not interested in a crisis. They will continue to drag their feet, just as they have done since the Biden administration began about 10 months ago. There'll be long negotiations. There'll be freeze and unfreeze, freezing the sanctions less for less, and the Iranians will stay where they are, which is very close to nuclear weapons, closer than ever before since we started dealing with this issue. They're closer now than they have ever been before, and that is because of the very wrong policy taken by the State of Israel. So why was the Prime Minister surprised? That says something about the decision-making processes in the State of Israel on the most important issues in Israel. He was a cabinet member. He was a Minister of Defense. The Iranian issue was handled by a single person, maybe with one or two other people. But the strategic discussions that Tamir was talking about never happened, because at the time it was clear that withdrawing from the agreement in 2018 was wrong without having a plan B. If the Iranians make progress, then Trump would attack them, Israel would attack them. No one dealt with it. No one did that. And that was the problem, not signing the agreement in 2015. I'd like to go back to you. I see that you're nodding, Mr. Pardo. First of all, everything that Amos said is precise. I just want to say that what happened in 2018 was a tragedy. It was an unforgivable strategy. The fact that Israel pushed the United States to withdraw from the agreement 10 years too early. I'm not saying it's a crisis. I'm saying that it's a mistake, a strategic mistake. I think a crisis is too harsh. When we talk about political issues, then on a political level, I would definitely call it a crisis. And I just want to add one point. The United States is now dragging its feet, and that is clear to Iran. Iran is dragging out the issue of Belarus and Ukraine. We saw the Prime Minister of Australia a few days ago talking about that. The Iranians see that and they're rubbing their hands together with excitement. They're doing it. These are excellent developments for them. They're playing the game. They're playing into their hands, into the Iranians' hands, in the best way possible from their perspective. I'd like to ask about the U.S. perspective. Maybe Yaakov can take it from there. We see the beginning of hostility between Israel and the United States, rhetorics, as we heard from before, but also a statement, like you said, in the New York Times, Israel may be successful in the operations, but is failing in strategy. What do we do about that?
First of all, I want to make a comment. There's a panel here, I think, that we can be proud of. We're all friends. We have discussions, but always polite. Things are difficult. I don't think that the withdrawal in 2018 was wrong. I think it was right. It's not you can get out, find the American president that he will withdraw when you feel like it. We could have had presidents that nothing would have happened. I think the mistake was that there was no plan B prepared. We should have withdrawn from the deal, and it's good that we convinced the President of the United States that we should withdraw. What's wrong was that we did not prepare plan B. The mistake was not the exit. Exit was good, smart, in the right place, because you cannot select a president. This president agreed, another may have not. The second thing is, historically, if I'm not mistaken, the chess was not invented in Iran. It was invented in India. It's true regarding everything we say about the Iranians and then praising them. You have to remember, in Iran, they went to a nuclear plant and they thought they would have a bomb 11 years ago, but they don't have it. And I'm not sure they have better ways to deal with some of the challenges that we pose to them, and we can continue to do so. Of course, if we pay attention and we put the right money into it, if we think correctly and act correctly, the fact that the Iranians are smart doesn't mean that we cannot deal with the nuclear threat in a way that at least will give us time. I was at least in one discussion before the bombing of the nuclear plant in Iraq, and they said maximum 5 years. Think how many years have passed since then. Time in the Middle East is nothing objective. It depends how you take advantage of it. And from 2018, we did not take advantage correctly. Regarding the Americans, look, the problem in America is our problem vis-à-vis America is that in the eyes of the Americans, some of them in an extreme way, Iran is no problem at all. In the Middle East, there are much more difficult problems. Human rights, the Palestinian issue. Iran, you have to cover it with a Band-Aid. But this is not one of the real problems of the Middle East. If you heard Turki al-Faisal just 2 days ago in Manama, these are the real problems of the Middle East. Palestinians. Yaakov, you talked about time in the Middle East that is running out, and so is our panel. Look, but our problem is that the Americans do not want to act. The extreme example is not Afghanistan, it's Tanif. You know, in Tanif, they evacuated the base so that they will not be harmed. And when they did get harmed, they did nothing. And the president said that one day they will react. You have to understand, it's superpower, a world superpower. They attack its base and it does nothing. It evacuates everybody, does nothing. Thanks, Yaakov. It happened also during Trump when they attacked the drone. I will not defend on anything, but the ones who did the Abraham Accord, after all, is Trump and Bibi.